I'm here on behalf of the National Research Council. I'm Denise Leblanc, and I'm the Director General of our Aquatic and Crop Resource Development Research Centre, which, of course, algae is a big part of that. And first of all, I'd like to welcome you here and make one note of apology that in the program, our distinguished and a very credible panel did not appear, but their names are there, and I'm sure you'll have plenty of opportunity to chat. So why did the National Research Council host this session? You may not know that NRC has been growing algae, the National Research Council, in Halifax, Nova Scotia for over 60 years. And really based on varying value propositions, varying opportunities that we had. At one point in our 100-year history of NRC and our 60 years of doing algae, we were looking at food and feed for live algal feeds for fish hatcheries. We also develop and use algal toxins for our marine seafood safety program. So we grow algae and use that as our focus for our Certified Reference Materials program. And many of you may know Acadian Sea Plants Limited, and their main product was developed in partnership with us. So I know the panel, we have a very high caliber panel here today. I want to thank them for coming, and you'll have plenty of time for questions, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion. And I know Liliana will chat afterwards if you were here before, but I really want to hand it over now. We have 1 hour, 7 panelists, and lots of questions. So I'm going to hand it over to our Director R&D, Aleks Patrzykat, who's leading an agri-food file for NRC, where algae, we feel, will play a very strong role in that. So Aleks, over to you. Thank you.
Merci Denise. Bonjour tout le monde. Comme Denise l'a déjà mentionné, je m'appelle Aleks Patrzykat, et je suis ravi de vous avoir avec nous cet après-midi ici à Rimouski pour notre discussion sur le sujet des algues. Ou plus précisément, le rôle que les algues peuvent jouer dans le marché agroalimentaire. Now, this session will be in English, and I'm sure the French speakers in the room just are feeling very relieved that I won't be speaking French with my funny Polish accent and the Italian grammar, but I'll be speaking English with my funny Polish accent. So perhaps we can begin the session by introducing our panel. And because there's a substantial number of people we have on stage, we let them introduce themselves and say a few words about the connection they have to the topic. Before I do this, then, I'd like to draw your attention to something that is really interesting. There was a meeting in France, in Nantes, 3 months ago. It was an algae meeting. It's called ISAP, and it's one of those iconic meetings. It happens once every 3 years, and because of that, perhaps, it's the meeting where a lot of experts actually show up, and religiously so. And it's the conversations that we have there carry on for the following 3 years. And, you know, it's perhaps testimony to the footprint that algae have in this biomarine sector, and to Pierre's ability to attract the caliber of participant to the meeting, that we pretty much could replicate this panel at an ISAP meeting if we wanted to. So I'm very impressed. There was an algae session on the other side early in the morning. So the conversation from the meeting we had earlier in France and the morning session will continue here. But first, perhaps you can introduce yourself with a couple of minutes of your name, affiliation, and interest in the field. Perhaps we start here. John.
Okay. Good morning. My name's John Sweetman, and I'm working with the Alltech Group. It's a company based in the United States producing natural feed additives and feed components for aquaculture species and terrestrial animal species. My particular interest here is in microalgae and its incorporation into aqua diets for fish primarily.
Thank you. Isabelle.
Hello, my name is Isabelle Gendron-Lemieux, and I'm a researcher at Mérinov, so Quebec's Innovation Center in Aquaculture and Fisheries. And I work out of the Gaspé office and specialize in seaweed, so in macroalgae production, and am affiliated to the topic through a program that I coordinate where I'm actually closely related to the product development, and especially for the food products for human consumption.
Thank you. Lucy.
So thank you. So I'm Lucie Beaulieu. I'm a professor at Laval University. I teach in food science, and I'm also part of the Institute of Nutrition and Functional Food. So I work specifically on seaweeds, and I want to enhance the value of seaweeds and the culinary potential of seaweed. And also in my Blue Factory, we can see seaweeds, but cheese with seaweed. So I invite you to go there.
Thank you. Jean-Paul.
Jean-Paul Cadoret, organizer of this fantastic ISAP meeting in Nantes. Thank you.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm a marine biologist. I've been working since probably 40 years now in macroalgae, in microalgae. I'm also a molecular biologist, and I'm the managing director of a small company called Green Sea. Green Sea valorizes algae in any directions, as extracts, pigments, and even as a feed for aquaculture.
Thank you. Stephen. I don't know if I know this guy.
I think I'm on here. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Stephen O'Leary. I'm the director of the National Research Council of Canada's Algal Carbon Conversion Program. But when I was first recruited to NRC just a little over 10 years ago now, my original position was to work on seaweeds, which was my interest, specifically seaweeds for food and for bioactive compounds. After about a year with NRC, I was asked if I might be interested in developing and leading a program on algal biofuels for microalgae. And since it was the vice president of our research division that asked me if I was interested, I thought I could certainly be interested in that. So I began a microalgal program at that time, which has since evolved into the algal carbon conversion program, where we've shifted the focus from biofuels production to algae for environmental remediation and the production of high-value products for microalgae. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Philippe.
Okay. I'm Philippe Potin. I'm a researcher at CNRC in France, quite equivalent to NRC in Canada. So I'm working with seaweed for now more than 30 years, but for 20 years I developed basic research on seaweed immunity, and this was inspired, in fact, by the interaction with companies which were interested to use seaweeds for the stimulation of plant immunity. So that shows how important it is to interact with company, because sometimes it could really be very inspirative for basic research. So of course during that time I interacted in several aspects of seaweed valorization, and since the last 6 years I'm coordinating a large project in France, integrated project, so-called IDEAG, which is precisely focusing on the same topic as this session, so really making the potential of seaweeds a reality for the future. And now I am also developing another project at the European level with several companies which are present here, especially Algal in my fund, which is really to start some demonstrators of large-scale biorefineries for seaweeds in Europe.
Thank you. Frank.
Hello, everybody. Frank Encart. I'm a marine biologist by training. I moved as a process engineer as well. I have created 3 companies, including 2 in the valorization of seaweeds. And I have also done a bit of an academic time, 5 years in a research center on biochemistry in Ireland. And now I'm working as a director for research and innovation of Algal. Algal is a French company. We have our headquarters in Paris, our R&D center in Normandy, and our production facility in Brittany. In this production facility, we are the main processor of Brittany. We are processing about 40,000 tons of fresh seaweeds per year, and we are producing mainly alginates, which are colloids for the moment. And we are looking at developing new extract and new compounds from the seaweed.
Thank you very much. So as you can see, the topic is algae for food and feed, but The subtopic here is developing collaboration. As you will see, you have just heard, the panel sets the stage for a discussion towards the end of our conversation of collaboration, especially focusing on Quebec, France, the rest of Canada, and the European Union. That's how we brought this panel together. There will be 3 subtopics, and we'll let the panelists begin the discussion, and then I'll leave a moment for you to join it at the end of each subsection, and then either you feel like it or you don't, in which case we move on to the next section. So the first topic of our conversation is the puzzle related to what's fashionable in algae. So the idea of growing algae for food and feed is a very old idea. Some parts of the world grow algae quite extensively already for food and feed. There are no real technological barriers to having products already in the marketplace, and yet it doesn't attract the same interest, and by interest I mean levels of investments in big boats and in fashion waves as algae did when the question of energy came. So, about 10 years ago, everyone was growing algae for biofuels, and everyone was growing algae for energy-related applications and developing them. And many of these companies actually, when they realized the value proposition was not that easy to obtain right away, moved to food-related applications for their algae growing facilities and operations. So my question to you is, why despite the fact that there is no technological barrier right now, and despite the fact that there's already production of algae for food and feed, why has it not attracted that same sexy wave of investment that algae for energy did? Could we replicate this? So I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on that. Would anyone like to volunteer to start?
I can start.
Go for it.
Okay. Well, I think the biofuel case is an interesting one, because we all pretty much know as scientists originally that this would be very difficult to achieve on algae. But I think at that time the rising price of the fuel was making a lot of sense, and the big advantage of algae is that basically you don't need so much to grow it. It grows quite easily, especially I'm talking about the seaweed there. It grows in the sea. You have light. You don't need to bring any fertilizer, any pesticide. You don't need to bring water. It doesn't take land. So of course it makes it as a very attractive material in order to develop a market, and in that case the idea was to do some biofuel. But honestly, this is technically quite difficult to achieve. I think the limitation question right now, why it's not yet in feed, what is not yet in other big markets, is because of at the same time limit of understanding of the composition and the variation of those seaweeds, of those algae, and also probably a lack of confidence in homogeneity of supply.
So it's the supply. The idea of algae for biofuels was good, but it was the idea that bringing it to reality was not as easy. And then what's happening in food, you're saying, is the supply and the uniformity, the availability of having it. Any further comments on that?
I can continue. In fact, it is not only a matter of techniques, but it's also a matter of volume of seaweeds. If you look at the world production of seaweed, it doesn't exceed 30 million fresh tons of seaweed. So that means it is nearly nothing in comparison with the terrestrial biomass production. So that means thinking about large-scale production of biofuel from seaweeds or even from microalgae, it's from a physical point of view at the moment, it's completely unrealistic. So that means, in fact, not all investment during the last 10 years were directed to biofuels. In fact, in France, it was the contrary. When there were a call for the development of the biomass for its potential for biotechnology, the future of bioresources. There were some applications in France, and we were one of these applications for marine biomass, really not promising millions of tons of production in France from maricultural seaweeds. We were really proposing to develop a high-value production of seaweeds for the development of our industry, which was already established, and to work with the companies to really improve the availability of the resources, which is essential to develop any business, but also to secure the other aspects which are also very important, especially the total valorization of the biomass, which were not occurring previously in our industry. So, except when seaweeds were used directly as food, but as a few years ago in France or even in Europe, the consumers were not ready to consume a lot of seaweeds. We were also thinking about other potential of seaweeds in nutrition and health. So we were developing new applications that was based on the development of new research on seaweeds, and especially the exploitation of the potential of biotechnologies, but also the potential of seaweed genetics to develop new applications. So that was completely different. So what we proposed, and of course there were a significant investment of the French government for that, 10 million euros, so it was really significant. It's comparable to the investments in some biofuel project at that time. It was not really directed to biofuels because I think from my background now in the field, it is unrealistic.
Yeah, I agree. I remember there was a time where if you wanted to hear about algae that were not biofuels, you had to travel to France. France did resist that wave. I saw the microphone being passed to Isabel. I'm assuming that means you'd like to go next.
Yeah, for sure. Actually, I wanted to speak more about what Frank was saying concerning actually the buzz around biofuels, because I believe that the issue of climate change, and one thing that has put forward seaweed as a sexy alternative to fossil fuels, but on the other side, for food, like Monsieur Potin was saying, where actually the consumer in Quebec is slowly getting used to seaweed as food, so it's not part of our culture, and we need to approach it slowly by putting forward some products that are appealing for the consumer, but also some products that they are used to. So gradually putting seaweed forward this way.
Thank you. Stephen, and then Jean-Paul.
So I was going to pick up on those topics as well, because over the last 10 years, my career has gone for a bit of that ride. Certainly, I do think it's a matter of buzz and economic opportunity at the time. So as Frank said, when oil was $110 a barrel, and there were political interests about energy security and domestic energy production, fuel looked like a very attractive option because it looked like there was going to be a lot of payoff. So there was investment in algal biofuels, and there was a lot of activity in algal biofuels. We've made a transition, at least in Canada, but I think in other countries as well, in terms of looking at, well, beyond fuel, there's an environmental remediative aspect that we can do with both microalgae and seaweed, and there's a social value there, and that can be also translated into an economic value in some cases if you're, in the Canadian environment at least, looking at avoiding the cost to emit carbon and staying under the legislative limits for emissions of phosphates and ammonia and greenhouse gases. So again, there's an economic value that may drive some investment and some activity in the production of algae for environmental remediation. When we think about food production from algae, and we all know that has gone on for a very long time, as Aleks mentioned, both seaweeds and to some extent microalgae, I think then we begin to think about farming. And in a sense, seaweed production is aquaculture or mariculture. It's a type of farming. And large-scale microalgae production can be looked at that way. And then we think, well, because it's farming, you have a farm-like income, and farm-like margins and farm-like problems and headaches. And I think that's where we see some stall in investment and activity, because we see, well, yes, it's something we could do, and it's something that's done, but in North America in particular, I don't have many friends who are saying, well, I'm going to put all my eggs into a new farm and develop products for markets that aren't mature yet in North America. So there are mature markets in Asia and in France for some products in other parts of the world, but it's a hard sell. It's a hard sell in North America, at least, to say, well, we're going to create investment and we're going to create activity in an area where it's difficult to demonstrate the economics as a food and feed product, and that's why we need to provide some greater context to say the value is beyond that. There are additional high-value compounds or additional value-added economics that come along with the production of seaweeds and microalgae, because it's a difficult sell to tell somebody that we're going to go to small unit farming for an immature market.
Yeah, it's a really interesting concept, because that would imply that is a different group of investors who approach the industry, that agri-industry investors who would look at the application in food and feed want returns that are more stable, but are not as likely to accept risk. Versus, I think, the dream of the biofuel industry attracted investors who thought that they could triple and quadruple their money, much like you would, burn rate and then pharmaceutical industry model of investing almost. And perhaps that is the differentiator. It's interesting concept. Jean-Paul.
Yeah, that's a very difficult topic, because talking about energy is talking about geopolitics, and I'm not a geopolitician, for example. And because we are a little expensive, but I think the problem is not that we are a little expensive. The problem is that the fuel is not expensive enough, and this is a kind of judge that's very irrealistic. And the second point, talking about energy, is very often to talk about taxes, and I'm not a tax guy either. So the story is that, and this is very interesting what I was listening, is that we ask since years, since decades, biologists to talk about economy. And it might be very interesting to have in the audience people that will come to us and complete this feeling, because I'm just a biologist, and which is already nice. It's not enough to have the complete picture of all these stories of energy, food consumption, social people. I mean, and ethnologists. Can we eat algae or not? So you see, this is a complete panel.
Thank you, and you're absolutely right. It's a far bigger picture that we are than what we can describe through science alone. It's not just from the point of view of technology and science. There's a real world there. There's market, the economic trend.
And we are in a business convention, so it might be interesting to have a complete.
That's right. Jean-Paul is saying it's a business convention, so we will be relying on members of the audience to tell us what the answer to the question is at the end. In the meantime, Lucy, you have the mic.
We were talking about the consumer acceptance of the seaweed or algae in food. So I think in our research we have to maybe study the consumer behavior also and help to develop products they want to eat. We have to be aware of that, and at enough, it's the kind of study we can do and help.
Thank you. John?
Yeah, I'd like to just conclude. I couldn't agree more on the issue of geopolitics, and there's nothing more frightening than tell someone that they're not likely to have energy for their cars and they need fuel. So that raises financing a lot more quickly than if you want to grow an agricultural sector. However, agriculture is probably one of the areas where a lot of heavy investment is now going on. So we can look to more sustainable ways of growing agriculture through investment. And I know that in America, for example, there's huge financial institutions investing heavily at the moment in agriculture. So hopefully that will help change things.
Yeah. Thank you very much. So this was our first topic, and if I would now invite members of the audience, if you have comments or questions, or if you're able to complete the picture for us here. There's a mic right here, and feel free to step up and comment. Are there any comments at this time? If there aren't, we'll move to the second section. Oh, absolutely, there's a microphone right there. Perfect. Yeah.
It's about, I forgot your name. You talked about the seaweeds. Seaweeds.
Lucy?
No, you. It's sexy alternate of the food. Seaweed.
Isabel?
Sorry about that. Some countries around the world are using seaweeds for decades. They have done lots of works. They have done lots of works on seaweeds. What do you think about that?
Sorry, they're using seaweeds for what? I didn't understand.
Some countries are using seaweeds for human food for decades.
Yeah. Some countries are using algae as human food already.
Yeah, for sure.
So what do you think about that? Where are you in comparing to them?
What I think about that is that when we compare it in Quebec, we haven't used seaweed as food for centuries in Quebec, so we don't have exactly the same culture around seaweed. But I believe that we can, that if it is possible in those countries to integrate it in the culture, that why wouldn't it be possible in coastal cities like we have here in Quebec? So it's just a proof that it is that it can be an important part of our culinary culture.
Well, the reason I'm raising this question that it's not that spending a lot of money you are reinventing the same wheel.
Oh, okay. You're thinking we're reinventing the same. Okay. No, I think that we can. I don't think that the goal here is necessarily to reinvent, but actually look at what is being done. And I think that a lot of the product development that is underway is not close to only looking at our culture in Quebec, but also looking at other cultures. So we have products that are developed that mirror products that are used that have been used in other countries, I believe.
Thank you, Isabel. Frank has a comment, and then John.
Just to continue on this comment, we always tempted to reinvent the wheel. It's human nature, I would say, at that stage. But no, I think we might reinvent the wheel on the cultivation side, to be honest. I'm not a specialist, and I'm talking only about seaweed there. Those techniques are known. IMTA is well known for, I would say, centuries in Asia. So it's not new. The thing is to adapt, our constraints and in our regulations. That is actually where somehow the innovation lands for the cultivation side. And then the other point is that the fact that what Isabel was saying is that in our culture, in Quebec, but it's true as well in France, we are not eating seaweed like that. It's actually linked to famine times, so we're not really, in fact, in our mind to eat it like that, as it would be in Asia and all this place where people are eating. So that means that innovation comes for us by processing. The way you're going to process it, the way you're going to stabilize it, the way you're going to bring it to the end customer in a way that he feels better in his mind, and in terms of healthiness, it will bring something as well. That's where I think the innovation brings all its sense in what we're trying to do.
Thank you. And one more comment from John, and we move on to the next topic.
Yes, I think it's about consumer education in this part of the world. We need to educate the consumers as to the value of seaweed products, the benefits of those functional molecules which are so healthy for us. It is a huge industry. I mentioned this morning, I think, 25 million tons of seaweed globally, roughly. $6.5 billion of turnover, and 80% of that is going to food and produced in Asia. So it's education in this part of the world that will help us.
Thank you. Philippe, did you want to add something to this? Or?
Just a few. In fact, it is not completely exact that all the seaweed production is going for food. Of course, the best value for seaweed is food. But in fact, in Indonesia, for example, in the Philippines, most of the biomass which is produced, which is quite significant, is nearly 12 or 13 millions of fresh tons, is going for ingredients. Ingredients which are entering foods, of course, Western food also. Products and all the reconstituted products, all the jelly and so on. And then it is a completely different market. But what is also should be said that the value of this biomass is very low in comparison. So seaweed is representing a large portion of the world aquaculture. But in fact, the value of seaweed is so low that it could not be longer sustainable in the future. So if we want to develop seaweed aquaculture in the future, we should give added value to the seaweed. It is not only the case for the Western countries, it is also the case in the emerging countries which are growing seaweed. Seaweed is really a valuable product, and it could, of course, directly enter in human food, but it could also provide a lot of solutions to feed the world in the future. Of course, as food, but food which will come from crops, and seaweeds could improve crop productions. We could also introduce seaweeds in animal feed, and that provide a lot of new solutions with alternatives to some products, and that it is a future for seaweeds aquaculture and production. And this will give value worldwide, not only in Western countries.
Thank you very much. Let's move on to the second topic then. So we had the discussion on algae for food and feed versus possibly energy, the food versus fuel conversation a little bit. Now let's move into the field of algae for food and feed and the hot trends in it. So my next question is, if you were to identify the trends in algae for food and feed, both seaweeds, macroalgae and microalgae, and when I talk about trends, I'm talking about the exciting things that are happening, the sexy big things, as well as some of the biggest obstacles. When you look at where the research is, research trends frequently go towards the obstacles that we're trying to overcome. So that's the next round of the next 15 minutes are going to be about big trends in algae for food and feed. And who would like to start? Frank.
Again? Okay, fine. Big trends. I think there are great opportunities both for food and feed in prebiotic aspects. This is definitely we are getting more and more knowledge in terms of what type of compounds in the algae, both seaweed and microalgae again, are actually promoting the development of probiotics, and this is true for human intestine, but also on the animal side. And I really think that this is something that is really a driver for the next coming. It can come sooner because we already have a lot of data on it. So in the last 2-3 years, I think that there is a great potential here. But there is always a but.
There's always a but. Huh?
Always a but. The problem might be in regulations. In some aspect, when you're going to develop a product that is going to face a specific topic, a specific activity, you're going to face the other side, which is the regulation. What can prevent you to put that on the market? And this is where I think a good of the focus now should be done in terms of sourcing homogeneity, to make sure that we are going over those regulation issues, and at the same time we are putting those new products on the market.
Thank you. Who would like to go next? Lucy.
Maybe another trend is the we are looking for new protein sources to replace some animal proteins. So it's interesting to have the seaweed as an alternative. So the amino acids are very good, the quality of proteins, but maybe what is difficult for seaweeds, for example, if I talk about seaweed specifically, the digestibility of the proteins. So we know that enzymes can improve the digestibility. So why not we can include these seaweeds in fermented food, for example, as cheese. Okay, I'm like, I want to talk about my project, but it could be a good thing to do.
Absolutely. Who would like to comment next?
That's not and that's not an easy topic because I think we mix up a lot of things. This is do we want to feed the people, which this will not be the case, or do you want to go to beyond the 2.0 and go to a very nice food, ameliorated and because if it's to feed the world, we just have to make more rice and potatoes, and that's it, and that's fine. And if we want to continue to ameliorate and to make that to make a functional food and to go beyond, there is a lot of things. The trends are not easy to find, but we know that we have so many paths and so many. We all have projects on a lot of things to bring to immunomodulation or probiotics or. So this is the 2.0. It's not to just feed. And we should be careful not to mix up the conversations.
Yeah, so if I understood correctly, you're saying that when we talk about algae for food and feed, really, we should probably, in terms of trends, talk about realizing that algae is specialty, high-value food with potentially nutraceutical properties that not your regular...
We're talking about biotechnology. If countries like India or China were very good in using the algae, this is because they had nothing else. It's not because they like that. It's a culture. This was the case for all the countries. They were eating what they had. Now we just have to go beyond that and to use the fact that they're good and they're specialized in that topic.
Yeah, that's a very interesting comment. Thank you.
I do not completely agree with this because, in fact, seaweed, even in Japan, is only part of the regular diet of the people. And as P was mentioning this morning, it's only 4 kilograms of fresh seaweeds per year. So so it's really not in comparison with other food. It's really not considerable. But the value of these seaweeds are really in bringing some compounds which are very important. It could be, of course, vitamins which could be abundant in seaweeds, but also a lot of fibers which are important for the gut microflora and a lot of also minerals which are also important. So that's a value of seaweeds. And of course, some seaweeds could also bring some interesting proteins, mainly red seaweeds. But at the moment, in Western countries, we are facing problems to cultivate such seaweeds. And the problem also for the future is really to really control the propagation of some important crops for the future, especially in the context of seaweed to produce some functional foods. We are far to really master the cultivation of the species which could be of interest in the future.
Yeah, thank you. Any further comments? Yeah, John?
Yeah, I'd just like to say that the question of nutraceutical application and let's say human nutrition is an area that it's of particular interest to us and to myself in the fish industry. So the application of microalgae to provide omega-3 fats for incorporation into fillet in fish is very important. And that's not only been done with fish now. In Canada recently we have authorization to use this product in poultry, swine, and other terrestrial animal products, which enables us to produce omega-enriched eggs, omega-enriched meat. All these things help to add to the benefits for human nutrition. So these concepts can be applied across many species, and the question of quality control is critical. You mentioned the variety of legislation that will restrict the use of macroalgae because of its uncontrolled environment. There are applications which are applicable for that technology, but there are also applications which are applicable for, say, heterotrophic production, which is much more controlled and less contaminant. So you have a product criteria which is specific, controlled, and always maintains the quality. So it's horses for courses, really, and there are many opportunities.
Thank you. Stephen, Isabel?
I was just going to mention that it occurs to me that, as we've discussed, there's a number of ways that algae find their way into the food and feed chain, either through direct consumption by humans or animals, or indirect consumption, whereby we feed animals, raise those animals for human food. We discussed the fact that, and I agree fully, that we need to look for higher value compounds if we're going to have algae brought into the market in any sizable way. And those higher value compounds in a food and feed market are almost necessarily going to be based on some bioactivity, some benefit to the growth of the animal or to the human that consumes the animal in terms of health or improved growth characteristics. And so we need to do both of those things. If we're looking at algae as an alternative source of protein or food to support population growth, in order to develop that market where we're going to be producing algae, whether it's seaweed or microalgae, so that there's more food on the table, if you will, in a global perspective, we'll only achieve that by finding the higher value application. Otherwise, it's going to be difficult to get the scale up for algal cultivation, and it's going to be difficult to penetrate a market when you're competing with already present rice, potatoes, grain, soy. Those markets exist, those costs are down. If we want to bring something else to the table, then it has to be based on cost to some extent, but also on some proven additional value. And we have to be looking for that.
Thank you. Isabel?
Actually, I think that's pretty much right, but also I think that for it to be accepted by the consumer, it can go through a trend of it being added to staple foods. So actual food that is consumed naturally by the consumer. So it's something that is added to something they know, and that is a good way to introducing the kelp, but the seaweed, the seaweed to the consumer, and having also the functional food, so the function added to it on top of that. So you're bringing really staple foods with something more to it as well. So I think that's a winner.
Thank you. And before I turn to the audience, there's a comment that I'd like to add to this that came from this morning's sessions that I think, Jean-Paul, you made this in the session this morning, that we are working what we have now and what we can culture, but there's a lot more just on the other side of the door, that if you take a ship and bring samples in, there are numbers of species that we have not been able to culture that could offer opportunities. Would you like to?
There is already a nice comment on that, because usually to the students we say for the microalgae there are probably 200,000 species, although Michael Gairy said there are 32,500. But when we talk to colleagues, and I look to Philippe coming from the cruises around the world, and we have Tara Ocean in France, we're going around, and the leader of Colomban, one of the leader of the cruise said, talking about algae, we go to millions, and we probably use 50 for the moment.
Yeah, and I think one of the big barriers is that some of these species may not be culturable at all. All right. I will turn it over to the audience now. Would anyone have any comments or questions regarding current hot topics in algae for food and feed? Current hot topics in terms of opportunities or barriers? Would anyone like to comment? If so, the mic is there. If not, it means that our panel did a spectacular job for you. Thank you. And we will move to the last section, and perhaps one that would be the most valuable from Pierre's perspective. This is a business convention. It is about relationships. It is about collaboration. So we've discussed various trends and challenges, and we're having this meeting, which is really interesting. There is a big presence from France. There is a big presence from Quebec. Clearly, the opportunities. Clearly, there's something about France that was different in the last wave. That the investment and interest in developing algae for food remained. There seems to be a trend growing in Quebec right now. Where do you see opportunities for partnerships, opportunities for collaboration? How could we replicate the way that the investments were made in France and leverage them into investments elsewhere? So this is the third topic here, and you may be aware of some initiatives that you may want to bring up here. They may be your own, or just general comments. Who would like to go first?
I can start first. In fact, I think it's not only France. In Europe, there is now European Commission is thinking differently about promoting seaweed cultivations and seaweed uses in the future, showing that algae in general are very important for the blue growth in Europe. And of course, the primary producers are the basis of the development of the chain. And this is precisely what we are trying to set up at the moment. So we set up with some companies which are here, a European project, but I think the context is very favorable at the moment. We are in the context of the Galway Statement for the interaction between EU and Canada and United States. I will take this opportunity also to mention that there is big investment at the moment in the States. So 22 millions of US dollars will be invested for seaweed research in the future. They are claiming that they will invest in seaweed bioenergy, but it is not the case. They are really investing in research and development about seaweeds. Millions of dollars will be invested in wood soil to develop seaweed genetics. So they are willing precisely to develop the same things we developed since we started to develop during the 5 last years in France to develop the genetics of the sugar kelp. So I think for the future we have really to collaborate between the two continents, because otherwise we will lose a lot of time, we will lose a lot of money, and we will develop the same tools. There is already some tools which are developed in a continent, should be used by the others. There is also some other tools in the other continents, and I will mention, for example, that here in Quebec there is a lot of investments for developing seaweed or other marine resources as functional food. So they are really investing sometimes until the clinical studies of some molecules, and this is very costly, and this is very important for the development of the seaweed as food. So we have many opportunities to collaborate, and we should collaborate. Of course, not only between the two sides of the Atlantic, worldwide, but I think the context and the opportunities for collaborating are really timely at the moment. Yeah. Not only for seaweeds, it's also the case for microalgae.
Yeah. Well, one interesting thing as you were speaking that I heard, and I've heard it over the past few years, generally traveling to Europe, that there seems to be enough coordination through the EU in Europe that you were quite comfortable saying that there isn't duplication within the continent. You said there's duplication between the continent and North America, but that's already a pretty big achievement of the European Union, I think, with the various systems that were there in place before. Would anyone want to follow that up? Would you agree? Yeah.
I agree with you.
Yeah. Okay, who would like to comment next? Stephen?
So, in preparation for the panel, I was putting a little bit of thought into that. Where would we look for collaboration, particularly between Canada and this region in Quebec, and with our progressive colleagues in France who are a little bit further ahead in terms of the industry? And it seems to me that at least in Eastern Canada and in France in particular, we share similar species resources, so that's one area where we could collaborate. We probably also share interest in specific compounds that we know already that we can extract from seaweed or from microalgae. So it can be on the resource that we're going to exploit, or it can be on the compounds that we're going to extract and purify and create markets for. So that's a blessing and a curse. The blessing is there are overlapping areas of interest and economic importance that we might want to look at together. The potential curse is just as was raised by Philippe, is we do run the risk of repeating work that's already known, repeating experiments that are done, and developing similar technologies in different places. And so, to borrow the analogy that was used earlier, I think we do have to be very careful not to reinvent the wheel, but instead focus on building the road that wheel's going to go on, because that's where we're going to find common value, on both sides of the Atlantic, but also around the world, is taking the best technologies that we have available now, improving them where it makes sense to do so. But most importantly, it's how do we take those technologies to application? How do we get production of the biomass increased? How do we increase our efficiency for the extraction or purification or modification of the compounds when we're talking about high-value extractives? How do we improve those technologies so that the road gets longer and we travel down it faster and we're not spending our time building wheels?
Well, there's a consequence to what you just said, and I just wonder if you meant that, because the implication is that the direction of that collaboration would be led by people closer to the application industry. Is that implied in that?
It is. I don't know if I implied that intentionally, but that is the natural extension, and it's true. I think that often we do look to industry to see where the pull is and where the direction is going. I'm not actually uncomfortable with that. I think that it's a sensible way forward.
Yeah. Who would like to comment next? Jean-Paul.
Well, in a way, we probably would need 3 or 4 more hours to talk about this, because there are several trends. Collaborations is at the scientific level it's obvious and it's very important. But what's funny to see, if you're a company, you don't want to share everything either. So you have to find a way to collaborate and not collaborate, or to choose with whom you're collaborating. And the understatement of this, and that's what's funny. I was trying to figure out what we are saying now, and what we were saying is we have to collaborate against China. Everybody was thinking that, or unconsciously thinking that we Western people we have to be together, and this is very strange, because why not to collaborate with China? And we're collaborating at the scientific level. But if you go to the real private field, you have to find a way. So the point is, how and with whom are we collaborating, and for what?
We are both collaborating and competing with China, because this is a problem, of course. And China is, of course, you can see that. You can see China as really very well advanced in a lot of areas, and this is true. But even if you look at seaweed genetics, for example, and we are collaborating with them about that because it's much more open. They have some advances, but they are also developing the same tools we are developing at the moment, using the modern markers for assisted selection and so on. So they are really in the same development as we are at the moment, on their own species, of course. But they are also considering sometimes to introduce some some species from Western countries in China, but this is another story. But in terms of biotechnology development, biotechnological development, they are really willing to learn a lot of what is operating in Western countries, because they are very powerful companies, which are number one in the world in some areas, for example, the areas of algylate. But they are still lacking some technology, and they are willing to. So we can share a bit of the research, of course, with them, but not all the research. And of course, we are also working with some company from France, which are developing markets for them in China. So they are really willing to enter the Chinese market. And this is the case in different areas. It could be in agriculture. It could be also in the cosmetic sectors. In France, the cosmetic sector is providing 50% of the value of seaweeds, which are processed in France. So it is huge. And the potential also for the development of the cosmetic industry is huge in China and other Asiatic countries. So this is how we can also envision the cooperation.
Thank you. Lucy, Isabel, anything to add? Frank? Yeah, Isabel?
Yeah, what I find interesting when we look at France is that there's a lot of fundamental knowledge that has been developed around seaweed, and in Quebec we don't have that big knowledge baggage, that big fundamental knowledge, and it would take many years to acquire that knowledge. Whereas it's interesting for France, for example, to maybe come here, you'll tell me, with this knowledge and see if in our constraints in Quebec, which are different, that applies and how this applies in the constraints. So it's interesting for us to benefit from that knowledge development in France, but also from France to test in an applied way in Quebec this knowledge.
Thank you. Frank, did you want to add?
Yes. Okay, my goal, I'm an entrepreneur, and my goal in the company is to increase the value of my company, okay? How do I do that? Based on all what we've said there, one thing that we said is that we are going to have a problem of biomass, a problem of sufficient seaweed to be able to target some markets, like feed market, on a homogeneous way, so that we can deliver to the feed people extracts that are homogeneous. We have a problem of volumes. Okay, so how do we do to solve this problem of volumes? Well, you have to go internationally and, in fact, look at sourcing and homogenization in each one of the country, the different species that we want to work with. This is the only way. So collaboration is actually absolutely needed, I think, if we want to make this value chain increase and really get realistic in terms of income in this field sector. This is the only way, in fact, to collaborate.
Thank you. John, last word goes to you.
Yeah, thank you. I'd just like to say that from perhaps the business point of view, what we could all cooperate on is increasing customer demand. We could try to really stimulate interest in the consumer across this part of the planet which doesn't know about algae. We might be sitting here together as 50, 100 people, but a lot of people don't know what it is, don't know why it's good for them, don't know anything about it. So surely a cooperative marketing campaign based on algae, its benefits, would kickstart the industry in a way to create demand which in return will improve investment and then lead to business development.
Thank you. Good. Okay. Because of how close we are to our end time, I see Pierre here wanting us to leave the stage to him, which we will. I would encourage the audience to speak to the panel participants afterwards if you have further questions or if you have comments for us regarding any of these topics. As was mentioned here, this is a business convention. A lot of the knowledge will not come from the stage. It will come from the audience. So we are looking forward to hear whatever you have to say about the three topics we covered today. Thank you very much for participating. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope you have a great evening. Bonne soirée.
Thank you.